The traditional belief was that in the beginning of the world, a war broke out and people were scattered all over looking for shelter, which they took under big trees. A few who took shelter under a big banyan tree were considered to be the possessors of these unclean spirits. It is said that many demons then settled on the banyan tree. When these groups of people were sleeping, the demons came down and possessed their bodies. Later, some women bore demonic children. These children were offsprings of demons, and they possessed double spirits, the natural spirit of man and other of the demon. These humans with double spirits came to be known as RAI people. Their demonic spirits would possess the body of another human and could even kill them. Another version was that their great ancestors fought a war with the Burmese. And since the Burmese were too strong to be defeated, they sacrificed bulls and the best core to their demonic god Priva. God Priva was pleased with the sacrifices of his devotees and promised power to those who would be going to the war next day. As promised, they were able to send out the demonic spirits bestowed to them by God Priva. Many of the Burmese soldiers were possessed by them and suffered a great jolt in the war and retreated. Unfortunately, these spirits refused to leave their bodies even after the war and became hereditary, which they called RAI. Ever since, the demonic spirits remain with these people who went to war. Once they enter the body of fellow humans out of enmity or out of love, they pave the way for other unclean spirits too. A shaman said that once these people with unclean spirit find their dwelling in another human body, more such spirits who roam the earth would come and possess them. When asked by the shaman why they would possess innocent human beings, the spirits would reply, "While I was passing this way, I found the house empty, so I entered." There are two ways of harming the victims. One is possession, and the other one is that the unclean spirit would enter the body of another person, but would not be able to possess them, but still they can make the person sick. This happens to someone who has a big heart, but not strong enough to defend the unclean spirit. An unwell Mrs. Api from Tangpa was admitted at AIIMS, Delhi. There was no sign of improvement even after various medical treatments. Prayer cells and pastors prayed for her recovery, but in vain. Mr. Sira, a minister of one of the churches in Delhi, requested Paya to examine the dying Mrs. Api. Paya accepted. Upon seeing Mrs. Api, Paya grinned and said she would survive. Mr. Paya, a shaman who hailed from Ukhrul, is a specialist in dealing with RAIs. When asked, he revealed a lot about them. Paya works in a call center in New Delhi, and he could heal demon-possessed patients when medical doctors failed. A young man by the name Chuai was looking after Mrs. Api in the hospital. As soon as Paya saw Chuai, he knew that Chuai's RAI was possessing Mrs. Api. He asked, "Why are you doing this?" Chuai replied, "Her daughter rejected my marriage proposal. In return, I am torturing her." Chuai had RAI bloodline. He could harm others if he wanted to. Paya commanded Chuai to leave Mrs. Api alone, and he did. Paya warned Chuai never to come back and possess her again. Mrs. Api was healed at that very instant. There was a wound which was like a hole in Mrs. Api's body and was only visible to the eyes of shamans. Paya applied python fat on the wound so that no RAI could possess her again. Some shamans also use oil or egg yolks to heal such kinds of wounds. If the wounds were not covered up properly, the chances of being possessed again would be quite high. The possession of Miss Chui by Songam is another interesting RAI story. Chuai came to Delhi to pursue higher studies. But ever since she landed in Delhi, she became unwell. She consulted several medical doctors, but in vain. Her family began to suspect that it could be a case of RAI. So they requested Paya to check on Chuai. Paya asked Chuai to look him in the eyes, but she refused. Paya knew that RAI possessed her, so he pulled her hair and shouted, "Why are you here?" Chuai answered angrily in a male voice, "That's none of your business." Paya commanded the possessor to leave Chui's body, but the voice retorted back, "I'll be there as long as I want, and you can do nothing about it. If you refuse to leave, I may have to kill you," hollered Paya. But the voice laughed hysterically and challenged him to try. Paya could see the possessor hiding inside the body. It is impossible to kill the possessor while they are still inside the host body. Once it is inside a body, the possessor's spirit flows together with the blood, gradually spreading throughout the whole body. If the uncleansed spirit reaches the throat, the host would be unable to breathe, which could result in death. Violent spirits would eat up major organs of the human body like lungs, liver, thus jeopardizing the host's life. The person who had possessed Chuai had that double spirit. Paya went back to hometown to find out about this possessor, who was a man. Paya could get in contact with these spirits either in his dreams or in visions. Paya said it was difficult to recognize the face or even find out their name, but through their conversations, Paya finally came to know the address of this certain possessor, who he now knew was serving in the army and was a resident of Dimapur, Nagaland. Paya approached the possessor's parents in Ukhrul. They were from Tangkhul village. He briefed the parents about how the son was troubling a young girl in Delhi with his RAI. The parents could sense that Paya was a shaman, and they knew that shamans could easily kill their son. The parents begged for forgiveness and assured that they would convince the son to leave the body of Chuai. The parents revealed that the son Songam loved Chuai very much and wanted to marry her, but Chui's parents turned down his proposal because Songam belonged to the RAI bloodline. Chui's parents sent her to Delhi to forget Songam. That evening, after Paya's meeting with Songam's parents, Chuai was healed. It is said that these spirits could not travel beyond certain boundaries set for them, but Songam's other spirits seem to have traveled more than 3,000 kilometers. When asked about the reason, Paya replied Songam had already possessed Chuai before she left for Delhi. Once that happens, then distance doesn't matter. In another case, Mrs. Loly, living in Sant Nagar, Delhi, had been suffering from an unknown disease for a long time. She had been consulting several medical doctors, but there was no relief. One day, she learned about Avu, a medicine man from Dimapur who had the ability of dealing with unclean spirits. Mrs. Loly traveled all the way to Dimapur to consult with Avu. Upon seeing Mrs. Loly, Avu declared, 9 demons are inside you. Avu could not drive out the demons as they were too powerful. He tried to touch Mrs. Loly and heal her, but Avu collapsed on the ground. Mrs. Loly had to return to Delhi unsuccessful. Once she was back in Delhi, her friend Mrs. Yaya told her about Paya, the shaman in Delhi, who had also treated Yaya in the past. One particular day, Paya visited Yaya in her police lines, her home in North Delhi. Mrs. Loly grabbed this opportunity and went to see Paya. Upon seeing Mrs. Loly, Paya exclaimed that there are several demons lingering around her. Mrs. Loly noted and said, Avu from Dimapur also said the same thing. Paya explained to her that all the RAIs were hiding around her chest. He told her that there were 9 holes in her chest. Mrs. Loly admitted that she suffered from excessive chest pain. Mrs. Loly kept a rolling pin on her bed to press on her chest to relieve the excruciating pain. Paya performed acupressure on Mrs. Loly's chest for more than an hour and drove out all the unclean spirits who were troubling her, and she was healed from that day. Another RAI story that happened in Soko village, Ukhrul district, also deserves a mention in this regard. Avu Surung's son married a girl from the neighboring village, Shillong. His daughter-in-law belonged to a RAI family. The unclean spirit from the girl's family kept troubling the boy's family. Whenever the girl's mother visited her in Soko, there were various incidences of people falling sick or household pets dying upon her departure. Their neighbors were also affected in innumerable ways. Even after repeated warnings, the unclean spirit kept coming back, jeopardizing the life of the family. One evening, the unclean spirit came and possessed Avu Surung's wife. She was in pain the whole night, and the family had to stay up late nursing her. Avu Surung got fed up with the unclean spirit's terrorizing rituals, and he decided to put this charade to an end all by himself. Thus, Avu Surung travelled to Chuai with a spear in search of his daughter-in-law's mother. On the way, he met her, and without any hesitation, he dashed towards her and pierced her heart with his spear. "Oh, I wanted to be the one to take your life, but you have succeeded in taking my life," gasped the lady. Avu Surung pulled out her spear and pierced her again and again until she breathed her last. Avu Surung returned back to his village feeling victorious. But little did he know that he had now become the new owner of the unclean spirit of the old lady. Avu Surung turned out to be more fatal than the lady he had killed. The whole village of Soko was terrorized by Avu Surung's unclean spirit. The family consulted Avu Koshue, the shaman of the village. Avu Koshue revealed that when Avu Surung pulled out the spear from the old lady's body, the unclean spirit also came out from it and nestled in his body. One must never pull out a knife or a spear from the body of RAI after killing them. If so, the unclean spirit will begin to dwell in the person that pulled them out, said Avu Koshue. Such is the story of Avu Surung, and the rest of his descendants acquired the unclean spirit, which the Tangkhul Nagas refer to as RAI.